Rain came down in thin, silvery sheets, soaking the dirt road until it turned into a ribbon of mud that stretched endlessly across the Texas plains. The wagon creaked as it climbed the last hill, its wheels wobbling through the muck. Inside, a woman sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, her heart hammering as if it were trying to break free. Her name was Clara. Everything she owned fit inside a small cloth bundle at her feet, an extra dress, a Bible missing its back cover, and a locket with a photograph too faded to recognize anymore. The driver slowed the horses as the Miller Ranch came into view, sprawling across the horizon like a sleeping giant. Wooden fences, weathered by years of storms, surrounded fields of golden grass. Smoke rose from the chimney of the big farmhouse, curling lazily into the gray sky. Clara stared at it, her stomach twisting. Somewhere inside that house was the man who'd sent for a bride, though not her. When the wagon stopped, Clara took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The wind hit her face, carrying the scent of rain, earth, and hay. She stepped down, her boots sinking into the mud. The driver tipped his hat to her and muttered a quiet goodbye before steering the wagon back down the trail, leaving her standing there, small and alone against the vastness of the land. From the porch, a tall man watched her approach. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes, a duster coat still damp from the storm, and boots that looked like they'd seen a lifetime of hard miles. This was Jack Miller, rancher, widower, and the man who'd written to the bridal agency months ago. His letters had been simple and direct: need a good-hearted woman who can handle ranch life. Don't care for fancy looks, just honesty. Still, Clara knew she wasn't the woman the agency meant to send. She wasn't the pretty one. The agent had said so herself before she left, had even whispered, "You're lucky he didn't specify looks in the contract, honey. Otherwise, you'd never have been chosen." Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she reached the steps. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Mr. Miller." Jack nodded, studying her quietly. His eyes were blue-gray, the color of distant storm clouds. "That'd be me. You must be my bride." Her heart sank. The words hurt more than she expected. "Sir," she said softly, "there's been a mistake. I think the agency sent the wrong woman. I'm not the pretty one you ordered." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the patter of rain on the porch roof. Then Jack's lips curved into a slow, easy smile, the kind that started small but reached his eyes. "Pretty one, huh?" he drawled, tilting his hat back. "Well, ma'am, I reckon the agency didn't make a mistake. You're all I needed." Clara blinked, unsure she'd heard right. She'd been told all her life that she wasn't enough, too plain, too quiet, too scarred by the past. Men looked past her, not at her. And yet here was this cowboy, standing like a mountain in front of her, saying she was enough. "I don't understand," she whispered. Jack shrugged lightly, stepping down from the porch. "Ain't much to understand. I asked for a wife, not a painting. You came, didn't you? That's what matters." He reached for her bundle before she could protest and carried it inside. The house smelled of coffee and pinewood, warm and real. There was a fire crackling in the hearth, throwing light across the worn furniture and framed photographs of a simpler past. Clara hesitated in the doorway, dripping rain onto the floorboards. "I don't want to trouble you if you'd rather wait for." Jack turned, his voice calm but steady. "You're here now, Clara. That's all that counts. Come on in. Supper's ready, and I reckon you could use some rest." Something inside her broke, something small, fragile, and long buried under years of rejection. She stepped into the house, her boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. Outside, the storm began to ease. The wind softened, the rain slowed, and through the open window came the faint sound of crickets greeting the night. For the first time in a long while, Clara let herself breathe. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for now, in the warm glow of that little farmhouse, she felt seen, not for what she wasn't, but for what she was. The days at Miller Ranch stretched long and honest, marked by the rhythm of the land: sunrise, work, sunset, rest. Clara soon found herself falling into that rhythm as naturally as breathing. Each dawn, she rose before the rooster crowed, her breath clouding in the cool morning air. She'd light the stove, grind the coffee beans, and bake biscuits that filled the kitchen with the scent of home. Jack would come in from the barn, brushing hay from his coat, and the way he smiled when he caught the smell always made her chest tighten. At first, she thought he was only being polite. He'd thank her for breakfast, compliment the stew she made, or hand her a flower he picked along the trail, little things that made her blush. But Jack never looked at her with pity or obligation. He looked at her like she belonged there, like she was part of the ranch itself, sturdy, dependable, quietly beautiful in her own way. The other ranch hands didn't share his gentle outlook. They were good men, hardworking and loyal, but they talked too freely when they thought no one was listening. One afternoon, while Clara fetched water from the well, she overheard two of them by the corral. "Can you believe that's the woman they sent him?" one said with a chuckle. "Poor Jack, must have drawn the short straw at the agency." "Yeah," the other replied, smirking. "He ordered a bride, not a farmhand. Guess he got what he paid for." The bucket slipped from Clara's hands, water splashing across her dress. Her heart pounded in her throat as she turned away before they saw her tears. She hurried back toward the house, her boots heavy in the mud, shame clinging to her like the rain that had soaked her the night she'd arrived. Jack noticed the change that evening. She was quiet during supper, her eyes fixed on her plate. When he asked what was wrong, she forced a smile. "Just tired," she said. But Jack wasn't a man easily fooled. The next morning, the two ranch hands were at it again, this time louder, bolder. Jack was behind the barn fixing a fence when he heard them. "Betty's regretting it by now," one of them said. "Could have had himself a fine lady, but instead he's got plain old Clara." Jack's hammer froze mid-swing. His jaw tightened as he turned the corner. "That's enough." The men straightened, startled. "We were just talking." "I heard what you were talking," Jack cut in, his voice calm but dangerous. "And if either of you got enough time to gossip, I reckon you've got too much free time on my payroll. You'll respect her, or you'll find yourselves riding out of here by sundown." Clear. The ranch went quiet after that. That night, Clara found him sitting on the porch, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. She came out softly, her hands twisting in her apron. "You shouldn't have done that," she murmured. Jack didn't look at her. "Done what?" "Stood up for me. They were only telling the truth," she said, her voice cracking. "You could have had someone beautiful. Someone who fits the picture of what a rancher's wife should be." Jack turned to her then, and the look in his eyes stopped her words cold. "Clara," he said, his tone steady, "I didn't send for a picture. I sent for a woman. Someone who'd stand by me through storms and drought, who'd work with me, not against me. You think beauty plows a field? You think it keeps a man warm when the world feels cold?" She stared at him, her throat tightening. "But I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently. "You've got more beauty in your heart than any lady in a silk dress could ever dream of. And I see it every day, in the way you care, in how you don't quit, even when it's hard." The silence between them deepened, not awkward but warm. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears that finally felt like release instead of shame. "You mean that?" she whispered. "I don't say what I don't mean," Jack replied simply, leaning back in his chair. "You've made this place a home, Clara. You've given it life again. You've given me life again." For the first time, she smiled without holding back. It was small and shaky, but it was real. That night, as the stars blanketed the sky, Clara sat by the window of her little room, listening to the wind whistle through the fields. The ranch hands, cruel words no longer echoed in her mind. Instead, she heard Jack's steady voice, his truth, ringing stronger than any insult could. Winter swept across the plains like a ghost, cold and relentless. The wind howled through the fences, rattling loose boards and sending flurries of snow tumbling across the open land. Life on the ranch slowed to a crawl. The cattle huddled in the barns, fires burned day and night, and the world turned to shades of gray and white. Clara worked tirelessly, her hands red from the cold as she chopped wood and cooked hot meals to keep Jack and the men strong through the season. But even the strongest man could fall ill when winter dug its claws in deep, and Jack did. It started with a cough, rough and deep, that he brushed off with a grin. "Just a chill," he'd said, waving her worries away. But within days, his skin burned with fever, his voice weakened, and the man who could ride all day without tiring could barely lift his head from the pillow. Clara stayed at his bedside from the moment the sickness took hold. She kept the fire stoked, sponged his forehead with cool water, and whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. "Please, Lord," she murmured through trembling lips one night, "don't take him." Not him. There were long hours when Jack didn't seem to know she was there. He muttered half-dreamed words, names of men he'd ridden with, fragments of the past. Once, he called her name, softly, almost like a sigh, and she caught his hand, clutching it to her chest. "I'm right here," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm not leaving you. Days bled into nights, and nights into days. The ranch hands took over his chores, but every man on the property knew that the heart of the ranch now beat in that small bedroom upstairs. They saw Clara through the window sometimes, sitting straight-backed beside the bed, her face pale but determined. When the fever finally broke, it was morning. A faint golden light streamed through the curtains, catching the dust in the air. Jack stirred weakly, his hand twitching. Clara leaned forward, holding her breath. Then his eyes opened, cloudy, tired, but alive. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She lifted his head gently and held a spoon of warm broth to his lips. Easy, she said softly. You've been out for days. Jack managed a faint smile, voice raspy as sandpaper. Guess I ain't much of a cowboy if you had to save me. Clara laughed through her tears, pressing a hand to her chest. You hush now. You'd do the same for me. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his gaze full of something deep and quiet. You already saved me, Clara, he murmured. Long before this fever ever came. Her breath caught, and for a moment, all the exhaustion, fear, and love she tried to bury came flooding to the surface. She wanted to tell him everything, that he'd given her a reason to wake up every morning, that he'd shown her what it meant to be wanted, not for beauty, but for soul. But words failed her, so instead, she reached for his hand and held it tight. The days that followed were gentle ones. Jack grew stronger, the color returning to his cheeks. Clara still refused to rest much, always nearby with tea, soup, or a blanket. When he finally sat up for the first time, he teased her softly. If you keep fussing over me, I'll start pretending to be sick just to keep you close. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Then I'll know you're better. When spring came, the ranch seemed to breathe again. The snow melted, turning the land soft and rich with promise. Wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth, and the air carried the scent of new life. Jack had healed completely by then, and though the work was hard, Clara noticed the way his steps were lighter, his laughter warmer. One morning, they stood together on the porch, coffee cups in hand, watching the sunrise. The light spilled over the hills in streaks of gold and rose, painting everything it touched with quiet beauty. Jack slipped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You know, he said thoughtfully, I still think the agency got it right. Clara looked up at him, eyebrows raised. How so? They sent you the wrong bride, remember? He smiled, that same slow, heart-stopping smile that had first disarmed her months ago. No, ma'am, they sent me the woman I didn't know I'd been praying for. Her throat tightened. You don't mean that. Oh, I do, he said, tipping his hat back. I wanted someone to build a life with. Someone strong, kind, stubborn when she needs to be. That's you, Clara, always has been. She turned her face into his chest, hiding the tears that came unbidden. His arms came around her, solid and sure, holding her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever touched. The wind rustled through the grass, soft and warm. The land stretched out before them, wide and endless, just like the life that waited ahead. For the first time since she could remember, Clara didn't feel like someone who'd been chosen by mistake. She felt chosen on purpose. Wanted, loved.